The skies over Earth burned orange and red, reflecting the orbital defense platforms that continued to fall through the atmosphere. Admiral Han watched from the command center window as another fireball streaked across the evening sky. That made 7 today. 7 more pieces of humanity's shield turned to ash. "Sir, the latest casualty reports from Proxima Colony," said Lieutenant Lee, sliding a tablet across the polished table. Han didn't want to look. The numbers kept climbing with each update. 3 weeks of relentless hegemony attacks had left Earth's outer colonies in ruins. What had started as border skirmishes had evolved into systematic destruction. The Galactic Hegemony, a coalition of 17 advanced species, had apparently decided that humanity's rapid expansion couldn't be tolerated any longer. "How many ships do we have left, Lee?" Han asked, finally turning away from the window. 37. Vessels capable of combat operations, sir." 37? Han couldn't keep the disbelief from his voice. Just months ago, the United Earth Defense Command had boasted a fleet of over 400 warships. "Show me." Lee projected a holographic display above the table. Han walked around it slowly, examining each remaining asset. The sight was worse than he'd imagined. The Dauntless, their oldest cruiser commissioned before Han was even born. The Pathfinder, a science vessel hastily retrofitted with point defense cannons. The Horizon, still bearing the scars from the Battle of Tau Ceti, training vessels never meant to see actual combat. Mining ships with minimal weapon systems. "This isn't a war fleet," Han whispered. "It's a salvage operation." "The Defense Council is meeting in 10 minutes, sir. They're expecting your assessment." Han nodded, straightening his uniform jacket. "Tell them I'm on my way." The walk to the council chamber felt longer than usual. Personnel rushed through the corridors, their faces etched with the same fear Han felt in his gut. Earth's final hours were ticking away, and everyone knew it. The 5 members of the Defense Council looked up as Han entered. Director Song, usually impeccably groomed, had dark circles under her eyes. General Park's uniform was wrinkled, as if he'd been wearing it for days. "Admiral," Director Song said, "the hegemony has sent an ultimatum." Han took the seat offered to him. "Let me guess. Unconditional surrender. They're giving us 48 hours to disarm completely. After that, they'll begin planetary bombardment, starting with our largest cities." The room fell silent. 48 hours. After decades of pushing into the stars, building colonies, establishing trade routes, humanity had 48 hours left. "Can we evacuate?" Han asked. Colonel Jun, head of civilian operations, shook his head. "Not everyone. Maybe 20% of Earth's population plus critical personnel. We've been prepping colony ships secretly, but we need time." "Time we don't have," General Park said. Han studied the fleet projection again. 37 ships against the might of the hegemony. A death sentence for anyone aboard them. "What if," Han said slowly, "we gave them a target they couldn't ignore?" All eyes turned to him. "We send out our remaining combat-capable ships. Not to win, that's impossible, but to make enough noise that the hegemony focuses all their attention on crushing our resistance." "While we evacuate as many people as possible," Song finished, understanding dawning on her face. "Exactly. The hegemony expects us to either surrender or make a last stand with everything we have. They don't expect a suicide mission designed purely as a distraction." General Park leaned forward. "Who would command such a mission?" "I would," Han said, without hesitation. The council exchanged looks. "Admiral," Song said gently, "you're suggesting we send our last military commander on what amounts to a suicide run. Our troops deserve a leader who's willing to face the same fate they are." Han's voice was firm. "And frankly, if Earth falls, what use is an admiral with no fleet?" After hours of debate, the plan was approved. Operation Last Light, they called it. The remaining ships would gather near Jupiter, making a show of organizing for a desperate defense of Earth. Then, just as the hegemony deadline expired, they would launch a series of hit-and-run attacks on hegemony supply lines and communication hubs. Meanwhile, The evacuation ships would slip away using the rarely traveled corridors beyond Neptune, heading for emergency colonies established in secret, years ago as insurance against exactly this kind of catastrophe. 2 days later, Han stood on the bridge of the Dauntless addressing the combined crews of what they now called the Remnant Fleet. Most were veterans, but many were Academy cadets who'd never expected to see combat so soon. Some were civilians who'd volunteered, knowing the odds. "I won't lie to you," Han said, his voice carrying to every ship in the fleet. "Our mission is not to win this war. Our mission is to be remembered, to show the hegemony and the galaxy that humanity doesn't surrender quietly, doesn't fade away, without leaving a mark. Every hour we survive is another 1,000 civilians safely evacuated. Every hegemony ship we damage is a reminder that underestimating humans is a mistake." He looked out at the faces before him, scared but determined. "They sent their strongest fleet to conquer us. We're sending our weakest to defy them. And I promise you this, the galaxy will never forget what we do here." A cheer rose up, starting quietly but building until it echoed through every ship. These weren't the sleek warships of Earth's prime. They weren't crewed by humanity's most decorated soldiers. But they carried humanity's greatest weapons: ingenuity, courage, and the fierce will to survive against all odds. As the remnant fleet moved into formation, Han allowed himself a small smile. The hegemony thought they were facing humanity's last gasp. They had no idea they were about to encounter its most dangerous moment. The remnant fleet drifted silently through the dust clouds of the Kuiper Belt, 37 ships of mismatched sizes and designs hiding in the shadow of a nameless comet. Admiral Han stood at the viewport of the Dauntless, watching ice particles glitter against the blackness of space. 6 days had passed since they'd left Earth behind. 6 days of waiting, planning and preparing for what most believed would be their final mission. "Admiral," called a voice behind him, "you should see this." Han turned to find Lieutenant Yoon, the Dauntless's young communications officer, holding a tablet. Her expression was hard to read, part excitement, part disbelief. "The hegemony's broadcasting on all channels," she said. "They're claiming victory. They're telling the galaxy that Earth has surrendered and humanity has been pacified." Han took the tablet, scanning the translated message. "They think we've given up already." He handed it back to her with a grim smile. "Good. That's exactly what we wanted them to think." An hour later, the senior officers gathered in what had once been the Dauntless's formal dining room, now converted to a war room. Maps and tactical displays covered the walls, and the elegant dining table was buried under equipment and star charts. "The hegemony's relaxing their patrols," said Commander Choi, their tactical officer. "They've redirected their main battle groups toward the Orion Arm. Probably another species they're looking to intimidate now that they think we're dealt with. Which leaves just their standard security checkpoints between us and their supply lines," Han finished. "Show me the closest one." Choi brought up a holographic display of the Proxima Centauri checkpoint, a massive ring-shaped station with 6 hegemony cruisers docked around it. All ships passing through this sector had to stop for inspection, and the station served as a forward operating base for hegemony forces. "We'll never get past that undetected," said Captain Jin of the Phoenix, a training vessel that had been teaching cadets maneuvers just 2 weeks ago. "We don't need to get past it," Han replied. "It's our first target." Murmurs of surprise rippled through the room. The checkpoint was heavily defended, and conventional wisdom said you avoided such fortified positions when outnumbered. "Sir, with respect," Jin continued, "the Phoenix is a training ship. Half my crew were students a month ago. We don't have the firepower to take on a hegemony station." "Tell me, Captain," Han said, "what systems does the Phoenix still use that were never upgraded during her service life?" Jin looked confused by the question. "Well, quite a few. The targeting systems are manual. Never got the quantum network upgrade. The engines are the original fusion drives. The shield harmonics still run on programmed sequences rather than adaptive algorithm." His voice trailed off as understanding dawned. "They're outdated." "Exactly," Han smiled. "Every ship in modern space, including the hegemonies, runs on quantum networks, adaptive systems, and AI-assisted targeting. They've all evolved from the same basic technologies, refined over decades. He gestured around the room. But look at what we have here. The constellation still uses experimental cloaking technology that was abandoned because it was too unreliable. The Horizon has magnetic grapples from the mining fleet. The Phoenix has targeting systems that require human operators. Lieutenant Yoon's eyes widened. Systems the hegemony has never encountered before. Or systems so old they've forgotten how to defend against them, Han confirmed. Our greatest weakness, our outdated, cobbled-together fleet, might actually be our greatest strength. Over the next 48 hours, the remnant fleet prepared for their first strike. The plan was audacious, relying on confusion rather than firepower. 3 days later, they approached the Proxima checkpoint under minimal power. Cloaking activated, reported Ensign Kang from the constellation. The small science vessel shimmered on the visual display before seemingly vanishing. The experimental cloaking system had been abandoned decades ago because it created unpredictable energy fluctuations. But those very fluctuations now served a purpose. They would mask the approach of the rest of the fleet by creating false readings on hegemony sensors. Phoenix in position, Captain Jin reported. His training vessel hung back, its outdated silhouette resembling an old cargo hauler to casual scans. Han took a deep breath. Begin Operation Thunderclap. The constellation decloaked directly behind the checkpoint station, its outdated energy signature barely registering on modern sensors designed to detect much more sophisticated systems. Before the hegemony could react, the science vessel fired its entire complement of magnetic mapping probes, normally used for celestial body analysis, directly into the station's communication array. The result was immediate. Sparks erupted across the station's surface as the magnetic pulses played havoc with their quantum communication systems. "They're blind," reported Commander Choi, watching the sensor readings. "Station-to-ship communications are down." "Phoenix, you're up," Han ordered. The training vessel surged forward, its manual targeting systems controlled by human operators rather than predictive algorithms. While modern ships fired in patterns optimized by computers, the Phoenix's gunners aimed where they thought enemies would be, creating an unpredictable attack pattern. 2 hegemony cruisers broke formation to intercept, their defensive systems adjusting to counter conventional weaponry. But the Phoenix wasn't firing conventional weapons. It was launching training buoys modified to emit the same radiation frequency as their fusion engines. The hegemony ships fired on the decoys while the actual attack came from the opposite direction. The Kyo Horizon, using its magnetic grapples to latch onto a third cruiser and overload its shield generators with a power surge. "They're scrambling," Yoon reported, listening to the hegemony communications. "They don't understand what's happening. They're reporting that we're using unknown weapon systems." Han allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. "Have the Dauntless move in, target their fuel reserves." The battle lasted just 23 minutes. When it ended, the checkpoint was disabled. 3 hegemony cruisers were drifting with critical systems failures, and the other 3 had retreated, broadcasting distress calls about an attack by unknown forces using unregistered technology. As the remnant fleet regrouped, something unexpected happened. Cheers broke out across the comm channels, tired, frightened crews suddenly realizing they had achieved what should have been impossible. They had struck a blow against the overwhelming force that had destroyed their homes. "We really did it," Yoon said quietly, standing beside Han on the bridge. "They never saw us coming." "They saw exactly what we wanted them to see," Han replied. "A collection of outdated ships that couldn't possibly be a threat." He turned to face the bridge crew. "The hegemony has forgotten something crucial about humans. We don't just use technology. We adapt it, improvise with it, make it work in ways it was never designed for. And that's something their standardized systems can never predict." As the fleet set course for their next target, Han felt something he hadn't expected: hope. Perhaps this wasn't just a suicide mission after all. Perhaps humanity's last, weakest fleet might actually remind the galaxy why humans had spread so far among the stars in the first place. Because humans never, ever, played by the expected rules. The news of the successful attack at Proxima Centauri spread through the remnant fleet like wildfire. Crews who had boarded their ships expecting to die within days now walked the corridors with a new energy. In the mess hall of the Dauntless, Admiral Han overheard snatches of conversation as he collected his morning ration. "Did you hear how the Phoenix took out that cruiser? 3 direct hits with targeting computers that haven't been updated since my grandfather was in diapers. The Constellation's captain said their cloaking field was fluctuating so badly they thought they'd be spotted for sure. Turns out the fluctuations confused their sensors even more." Han sat down next to Chief Engineer Kim, who was hunched over a tablet filled with technical diagrams. Kim had been pulled from retirement for this mission. He'd spent 40 years maintaining the outdated systems most engineers now only read about in history books. "Something wrong with the engines?" Han asked. Kim looked up with a grin that made him look 20 years younger. "Just the opposite. I've been talking with the other engineers across the fleet. We've realized something interesting about our fusion reactors." He slid the tablet toward Han. "Modern ships use quantum-stabilized fusion, clean, efficient, and with a very specific energy signature. Our outdated reactors are messier. They leak radiation across multiple spectrums." "Is that going to be a problem?" "It's going to be an advantage. Look at this." Kim pulled up a recording from the battle. When the Phoenix engaged that cruiser, their targeting systems kept readjusting. They couldn't get a solid lock because our radiation signature kept shifting. Their sensor calibration. Han studied the footage with growing excitement. "So we're naturally jamming their systems just by running our engines?" "Exactly. And I think we can enhance it. If we modify our reactor shielding to deliberately leak specific radiation patterns." Kim's eyes sparkled with the joy of an engineer who'd found an elegant solution to an impossible problem. Before Han could respond, Lieutenant Yoon's voice came over the comm. "Admiral, to the bridge. We're picking up hegemony communications. Well, you should hear this, sir." 5 minutes later, Han stood listening to a translated hegemony transmission. The voice belonged to someone called High Commander Tul, addressing what appeared to be a war council. "These human vessels are employing unknown technologies," Tul was saying, his translated voice carrying the distinctive clicking undertones of hegemony speech. "They do not match any known Earth military signatures. Their attack patterns defy strategic logic. Their weapons appear primitive yet are causing unprecedented damage to our systems," a second voice responded. "Could these be experimental vessels? Secret weapons they held in reserve?" "Impossible," Tul replied. "Our intelligence was thorough. These appear to be outdated vessels, yet they are operating in ways our tactical computers cannot predict. I am dispatching the 7th Battle Group to eliminate this anomaly." The recording ended, and Han looked around at his senior officers. "They're sending a full battle group," Commander Choi said quietly. "That's at least 20 ships, including at least 1 dreadnought." "They're afraid," Han realized aloud. "They don't understand what we're doing or how we're doing it." "With respect, sir," Captain Jin said, "they're right to be afraid of what they don't understand, but wrong to think throwing more ships at the problem will solve it. 20 ships or 200, they're still expecting us to fight like they—" Tuhan nodded slowly. "And we won't. Choi, where is this battle group likely to intercept us?" The tactical officer brought up a star map. "Based on their last known position and our current heading, the most likely intersection point would be here." He highlighted a region of space. "The Sirius Gap, a narrow corridor between 2 dense asteroid fields." "Perfect," Han said. "Let's get there first and prepare a welcome." 3 days later, the remnant fleet hid among the asteroids of the Sirius Gap. The massive rocks, some the size of small moons, provided cover as they waited for the hegemony battle group to arrive. On the Hoffnung, a converted civilian transport now serving as a medical frigate, Dr. Bay was conducting a final check of her equipment when Captain Song entered the makeshift sickbay. "Doctor, the Admiral wants to know if your project is ready," Song said, looking uncertainly at the large machinery taking up half the bay. Dr. Bay patted the device affectionately. "Ready as it'll ever be, though I still think it's crazy." The project had been her idea, a desperate inspiration born from her previous work in agricultural terraforming. The device was designed to modify soil composition on colony worlds, using targeted molecular resonance to break down and reorganize elements. Dr. Bay had realized after studying the hegemony ship fragments recovered after the Proxima battle that their crystalline hulls operated on similar molecular principles. "They're sending the signal," Song said, checking his communicator. "Battle stations." Across the fleet, crews moved to their positions. Unlike the surprise attack at Proxima, this would be a direct confrontation. The hegemony battle group emerged from lightspeed exactly where predicted. 22 vessels, including the massive dreadnought Implacable at their center. "All ships maintain position," Han ordered from the Dauntless. "Let them come to us." The hegemony formation advanced cautiously into the gap, scanning for the human fleet they knew must be nearby. When their lead ships had fully entered the narrowest part of the corridor, Han gave the signal. "All ships execute Operation Avalanche." The remnant fleet didn't fire weapons. Instead, the mining vessel Horizon activated its powerful tractor beams, originally designed to move asteroids into mining position, and pulled several massive rocks from their stable orbits. As the asteroids tumbled toward the hegemony formation, the enemy ships easily destroyed them with precision fire. But that was the point. The asteroids shattered into thousands of smaller pieces, creating a debris field that their sensors struggled to navigate through. "Chief Kim, now," Han ordered. Across the fleet, engineers modified their reactor shielding, deliberately venting radiation in patterns designed to interfere with hegemony targeting systems. The enemy ships began firing wildly, their shots going wide as their computers tried to compensate for the conflicting sensor data. "Dr. Bay, you're up," Han said. On the Hoffnung, Dr. Bay activated her modified terraforming device. The beam was invisible, but its effect on the nearest hegemony cruiser was immediate and spectacular. Sections of its crystalline hull began to vibrate at a molecular level, creating spiderweb cracks that rapidly spread across its surface. "It's working," she shouted, watching through the viewport as the enemy vessel's hull shattered like glass, exposing inner compartments to the vacuum of space. The battle lasted less than an hour. The remnant fleet lost 2 ships, painful casualties they could ill afford, but the hegemony lost 7, including a heavy cruiser, and the dreadnought Implacable itself suffered severe damage to its propulsion systems. As the battered hegemony forces retreated, leaving their disabled vessels behind, a stunned silence fell over the Dauntless bridge. "We shouldn't have won that," Choi said quietly. "By every tactical analysis, we should have been obliterated." "Their tactical analysis is the problem," Han replied. "They expected us to fight their way, to use the same strategies, the same technologies, the same protocols they've optimized over centuries." He looked around at his bridge crew, their faces tired but triumphant. "But humans have always been at our most dangerous when we have nothing left to lose and everything to fight for." As the fleet regrouped and began emergency repairs, Han received reports from across the ships. Crews were exhausted but determined. Engineers were sharing ideas for more modifications. Doctors were treating the wounded with improvised tools and techniques the hegemony would never have considered. The remnant fleet, Earth's weakest, most desperate force, was becoming something the galaxy had never seen before, a testament to humanity's most essential quality. Not our strength or our technology, but our endless capacity to adapt, to surprise, and to defy the impossible. The hegemony had severely underestimated what they were facing. This wasn't just a fleet. It was humanity's stubborn refusal to be extinguished. The medbay of the Dauntless had never been designed to handle this many wounded. Beds lined every available space, and the air smelled of antiseptic and sweat. Admiral Han moved carefully between them, stopping to speak with each injured crew member. These men and women had survived the impossible, twice now, but their numbers were dwindling. "Admiral," called Dr. Bay, waving him over to a corner where she was checking a young engineer's bandages. "Good to see you making rounds. It helps. Morale." Han nodded, looking around at the wounded. "How are our supplies holding up?" "We're managing. The Hoffnung converted more cargo space to medical use after the last battle." She lowered her voice. But we can't sustain another engagement like Sirius Gap. We lost too many people. Han knew she was right. The remnant fleet had started with barely enough crew to operate all 37 ships. Now, with 2 vessels destroyed and dozens of casualties, they were stretched dangerously thin. "Sir," Lieutenant Yoon appeared at his side, tablet in hand. "We're picking up an unusual transmission. I think you should hear this." In the privacy of a small supply closet, the only place they could find away from prying ears, Han listened to the message Yoon had intercepted. "This is Captain Gill of the independent trading vessel Sky Wanderer," said a cautious voice, speaking in lightly accented English. "We've heard rumors about a human fleet that bloodied the hegemony's nose. If you're real, if you're out there, you should know you're not alone. Many of us in the independent systems have suffered under hegemony expansion. We're prepared to help if you'll have us." The message continued with coordinates for a potential rendezvous point in a system known for its neutrality in galactic politics. Could be a trap, Han mused, though he didn't really believe it. The hegemony wouldn't need such elaborate schemes to find them. Or it could be exactly what it sounds like, Yoon replied. "We're not the only ones who hate what the hegemony is doing to free worlds." Han considered their options. The mission had already extended well beyond its original purpose as a distraction. The civilian evacuation ships would have reached the emergency colonies by now. The remnant fleet had fulfilled its duty. They could disappear into the vastness of space, perhaps finding some remote corner of the galaxy where the survivors could live out their days. But something had changed. Their successes, however improbable, had created something dangerous: hope. Set course for the rendezvous point, Han decided. But approach with extreme caution. We'll send only the Constellation under cloak to make initial contact. 3 days later, the Constellation returned with astonishing news. Waiting at the coordinates wasn't just the Sky Wanderer, but 6 other independent vessels from systems across the sector. And that wasn't all. They'd brought supplies, weapons, and most precious of all, volunteer crew members willing to join the fight against the hegemony. "They say there are more coming," reported Commander Choi, who had led the reconnaissance mission. "Word of our victories has spread through independent communication channels. The hegemony tried to suppress the news, claiming we were just pirates they'd soon eliminate, but that only made people more curious." A week later, the remnant fleet had grown to 42 ships. The new additions weren't military vessels, mostly modified traders and transports, but they brought fresh supplies and eager personnel. More importantly, they brought information about hegemony movements and vulnerabilities that proved invaluable for planning their next strikes. In the war room of the Dauntless, now crowded with the captains of these new allied vessels, Han studied the updated star charts. "The hegemony has pulled back from 3 secondary outposts to reinforce their main supply corridor," said Captain Gill, a stocky woman with close-cropped gray hair who had become their most valuable intelligence source. "They're centralizing their forces, making them easier to defend, and easier to target," added Captain Jin of the Phoenix. The young officer had grown more confident with each successful engagement, his training vessel now decorated with hegemony kill markers along its hull. "We should hit their communication relay at Epsilon Indi," suggested another captain, a former hegemony citizen whose world had been stripped of resources and left destitute. Without it, their response times between systems would double. As they debated targets and strategies, Han felt a strange sensation he hadn't experienced in weeks: genuine optimism. What had begun as a suicide mission, a desperate last stand to buy time for evacuees, had evolved into something else entirely: the beginnings of a resistance movement that spanned multiple systems. But Han also carried a weight no one else in the fleet understood. Only he knew the complete truth, the secret he'd kept since they'd left Earth orbit 6 weeks ago. That evening, as the expanded fleet prepared for their next operation, Han called his original senior officers to his private quarters. The small room was barely large enough for all of them to stand comfortably, but he needed absolute privacy for what he was about to share. "I've received a secured transmission," he began without preamble, "from Earth Defense Command." The officers exchanged shocked glances. "Earth Defense Command still exists?" Choi asked. "But the evacuation?" Was completed successfully 3 weeks ago, Han confirmed. The civilian ships reached the emergency colonies safely. A relieved murmur passed through the group. But that's not all, Han continued. The evacuation wasn't what we thought it was. He took a deep breath. Those ships weren't just carrying civilians, they were carrying our best scientists, engineers, and military strategists, along with experimental technology that had been developed in secret for decades. What kind of technology? Asked Chief Engineer Kim. The kind the hegemony would have destroyed Earth to prevent us from developing. Theoretical propulsion systems, weapons platforms, defense systems, projects too dangerous or unstable to deploy. Until now. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. So we weren't just buying time for people to escape, Captain Jin said slowly. We were buying time for Earth to prepare its real defense. Han nodded. The remnant fleet was never meant to be humanity's last stand. We were the distraction while the real plan unfolded. And now? He brought up a secure communication on his tablet. Now they're ready. Earth Defense Command is preparing to reveal what they've been building, and they want us to be part of it. The officer stared at him, expressions shifting from shock to dawning understanding. You mean we're not alone? Lieutenant Yoon whispered. We never were, Han replied. But I couldn't tell you. Couldn't tell anyone. If we'd been captured, if the hegemony had somehow extracted that information, they would have focused everything on finding the evacuation ships instead of chasing us around the sector, Choi finished. You played us all. I did what was necessary, Han said simply. And so did all of you. What we've accomplished, what you've accomplished, goes far beyond what anyone expected. You were supposed to be a minor annoyance to the hegemony, a brief distraction. Instead, you've become the spark that's igniting resistance across the sector. He looked around at their faces, tired, scarred, but unbroken. Tomorrow, I'm going to tell the entire fleet the truth. And I'm going to offer everyone a choice. We can rendezvous with Earth's new defense force and join whatever they're planning. Or we can continue what we've started here, this unexpected resistance movement that's growing by the day. Do we have to choose? Asked Dr. Bay. Maybe we're exactly where we need to be. The fleet no one saw coming, the threat no one properly evaluated. Han smiled. That's what I hoped you'd say. As his officers filed out, each lost in thought about what the revelation meant, Han turned to the viewport. Somewhere out there, the Hegemony Council was undoubtedly planning their final solution for this human problem that refused to go away quietly. Let them come, he thought. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity's weakest fleet had never been weak at all. It had simply been the advance guard for a storm no one saw coming. The news spread through the remnant fleet like a wildfire. They weren't alone, had never been alone. For 6 weeks they'd fought, believing they were humanity's last desperate stand, only to discover they were part of something much larger. The revelation transformed the fleet overnight. Crews worked with renewed purpose, repairing damaged systems and implementing new modifications with feverish intensity. Admiral Han stood on the bridge of the Dauntless, watching the activity through the viewport as shuttles moved between ships, carrying supplies and personnel. The fleet now numbered 53 vessels, a motley collection of Earth's cast-offs joined by independent traders, former hegemony subjects, and even a handful of ships they'd discovered drifting abandoned in contested space. Admiral, Lieutenant, Yoon's voice interrupted his thoughts. Our deep space sensors are picking up a massive energy signature approaching from the Tau Ceti direction. It's huge, sir. Han moved to the sensor station. The reading was unmistakable. A hegemony battle fleet far larger than anything they'd encountered before. How many ships? He asked quietly. Yoon's fingers flew over the controls. At least 200, sir, including 3 dreadnoughts. A heavy silence fell over the bridge. They had survived against overwhelming odds before, but this was different. The hegemony had finally committed a force large enough to ensure their destruction, no matter how clever their tactics. They're broadcasting on all frequencies, Yoon reported. It's being transmitted in English. Let's hear it, Han ordered. The voice that filled the bridge was cold and precise, the translation program only slightly softening the clicking undertones of hegemony speech. Attention, human resistance vessels. This is Supreme Commander Vex of the Hegemony Pacification Fleet. Your illegal actions against hegemony assets have been classified as terrorist activities. You will power down all systems and prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will result in immediate destruction. You have 1 standard hour to comply. Han looked around at his bridge crew. They had known this moment would come eventually, when the hegemony finally tired of their raids and committed overwhelming force to crush them. Send a message to all ships, Han said. Battle stations. And patch me through to Earth Defense Command. Tell them we could use that surprise. They promised right about now. The fleet moved into defensive formation around the Dauntless. They had chosen their ground carefully, a region of space near Tau Ceti, where gravitational eddies created unpredictable currents that played havoc with navigation systems. It was a dangerous location for a battle, but danger had become their ally. On the medical frigate Hoffnung, Dr. Bay finished distributing emergency medical kits to all sections of the ship. She had given up trying to maintain a proper sick bay. The entire vessel was now a floating hospital, ready to receive casualties from what everyone knew would be their hardest fight. Doctor, called one of her assistants, you should see this. Doctor. Bay joined him at a viewport and felt her breath catch. The hegemony fleet was visible now, a vast armada stretching across the starfield, their crystalline hulls glinting in the light of Tau Ceti. It was beautiful and terrifying, like watching an approaching tsunami. There are so many of them, the assistant whispered. Numbers aren't everything, Dr. Bay replied with more confidence than she felt. Remember Sirius Gap. But even as she said it, she knew this was different. At Sirius Gap they had faced odds of 20 to 1. Here it was closer to 400 to 1. No amount of improvisation could overcome such a disparity. On the Phoenix, Captain Jin addressed his crew, a mix of academy cadets and experienced officers who had transferred from damaged vessels. I won't lie to you, he said, his young face solemn. Those are bad odds out there. But every time we've faced the hegemony, we've done the impossible. They expect us to fight like they do, to follow the same rules of engagement they've used for centuries. And every time we've shown them that humans don't play by those rules. He paused, looking at each face in turn. Whatever happens today, remember this. 6 weeks ago we left Earth expecting to die within days. Everything since then has been borrowed time, and look what we've done with it. We've shown the galaxy that humanity doesn't surrender, doesn't fade quietly. We fight, we adapt, we survive. Across the fleet, similar scenes played out as commanders prepared their crews for what might be their final battle. The hegemony fleet advanced slowly, methodically, spreading into an envelopment pattern designed to cut off any escape routes. They're moving into position, Commander Choi reported on the Dauntless. Estimate weapons range in 10 minutes. Any word from Earth Defense Command? Han asked. Nothing yet, sir, Yoon replied. Our last transmission was acknowledged, but no details on when or if assistance will arrive. Han nodded grimly. He hadn't really expected immediate help. Whatever Earth had been developing, it would take time to deploy. Time they might not have. All ships, prepare to execute attack pattern Omega, he ordered. It was their most aggressive formation, designed to inflict maximum damage in a short time. A suicide run, essentially. The fleet tensed, waiting for the command to charge the vastly superior enemy force. But before Han could give the order, Lieutenant Yoon called out, Sir, massive energy spike detected, behind the hegemony fleet. All eyes turned to the tactical display. Something was happening at the edge of their sensor range, a distortion in space itself like fabric being stretched to its breaking point. What is that? Choi demanded, but no one had an answer. The distortion grew and suddenly space itself seemed to tear open. Through the rip came ships, dozens of them at first, then hundreds. They were unlike anything Han had ever seen. Sleek, dark vessels with energy signatures that fluctuated in ways that defied conventional physics. We're being hailed, Yoon reported, her voice trembling with excitement. It's Earth Defense Command, The voice that came through was familiar to Han. Director Song, the same woman who had approved their mission 6 weeks earlier. Remnant Fleet, this is Director Song aboard the EDS Defiance. Sorry we're late. Had a few bugs to work out with the new drive systems. A cheer erupted across the bridge of the Dauntless. The Hegemony Fleet is turning to engage the new arrivals, Choi reported, his professional demeanor cracking with a grin. Remnant Fleet, Director Song continued. The experimental technology we evacuated with is fully operational. We're deploying phase shift drives and gravity lance weapons. Suggest you move your vessels clear of the engagement zone. This might get messy. Han watched in awe as the Earth vessels executed maneuvers that should have been impossible. Appearing to jump instantaneously from one position to another without passing through the space between. The Hegemony Fleet, caught completely by surprise, struggled to track targets that refused to follow the normal rules of physics. They developed phase shift technology, Chief Engineer Kim whispered, joining Han at the viewport. The theoretical work was started decades ago, but no one thought it could be stabilized enough for practical use. The Hegemony Fleet fired desperately at enemies they could barely target. Their formation, designed to trap the Remnant Fleet, now left them vulnerable from multiple directions, as Earth's new ships attacked from positions that changed faster than defenses could adjust. Admiral, Yoon called. Director Song is requesting that we engage the nearest Hegemony dreadnought. They say they want the honor of the killing blow to go to the fleet that started this resistance. Han looked around at his bridge, crew, at the faces that had been prepared to die minutes earlier and now shone with renewed determination. Well, he said with a smile, we wouldn't want to disappoint them. All ships focus fire on the Hegemony flagship. Let's finish what we started. The battle that followed would later be recorded in the histories of a dozen species as the Tau Ceti Reckoning. The mighty Hegemony Fleet, caught between Earth's technological revolution and the battle-hardened improvisation of the Remnant Fleet, suffered catastrophic losses. Within hours, Supreme Commander Vex, his flagship crippled by weapons he couldn't understand and tactics he couldn't predict, transmitted his unconditional surrender. As the Remnant Fleet regrouped amid the debris of battle, Han received a personal transmission from Director Song. When we asked you to lead a distraction, Admiral, we expected perhaps a week of harassment tactics before you were forced to scatter or were destroyed, she said. Instead, you created a legend. Every world in the sector has heard stories of the fleet that wouldn't die, the humans who fought with outdated ships and impossible tactics. We just did what humans have always done, Han replied. Adapt and survive. You did more than that, Song said. While we were developing new technology, you were reminding the galaxy of something they'd forgotten about humanity. That our strength has never been in our weapons or our ships. It's in our refusal to accept defeat, our ability to find solutions where none should exist. As representatives from formerly subjugated worlds arrived to witness the formal surrender of the Hegemony forces, Han stood on the observation deck of the Dauntless. Beside him were the officers and crew who had joined what should have been a suicide mission, and had instead changed the course of galactic history. Did you know? Asked Lieutenant Yoon, joining him at the viewport. When we left Earth, did you know about the phase shift technology? Han shook his head. I knew they were working on something big, but the details were compartmentalized. All I knew was that we needed to buy them time and create as much chaos as possible. Well, Yoon said with a smile, I'd say mission accomplished, sir. As the fleet that had once been Earth's weakest, most desperate force prepared to join the new coalition, forming in the wake of the Hegemony's defeat, Han reflected on the strange journey that had brought them here. They had been sent out as a sacrifice, expected to die quickly and bravely. Instead, they had become the spark that ignited a revolution. The galaxy would indeed never forget the lesson, that humanity's greatest weapon had never been technology or numbers, but the simple, stubborn refusal to accept that anything, even extinction, was inevitable.